Hello, welcome to today's at-home learning series for literacy. Today's lesson is for all of the fifth graders out there, though everyone is welcome to tune in. This lesson is the last in this week's series. My name is Ms. Thompson and I'm a fifth grade teacher in Tennessee schools. I'm so excited to be your teacher for this lesson. Welcome to our virtual classroom. If you didn't see any of the previous lessons, you can find them at www.tn.gov/education. But you can still tune into today's lesson even if you haven't seen the others. Today, we'll be learning even more about a man that changed the history of human communication. But before we get started, as always, to participate fully in our lesson, you need a few things. You'll need 2 pieces of paper, something to write on, something to write with. You can get a highlighter or a marker if you have one around, but if not, a pen and a pencil will always work. I'll give you a few moments to get prepared for our time together today. We've had some great fun getting started in each of our previous lessons, and today is going to be another great time. Since I've had you count a lot, I thought I'd try something new today. Are you intrigued? Grab a piece of paper and something to write with, quickly. Okay, in our last lesson, I had to stop reading at a very interesting part. Remember, we talked about Marconi, and Marconi finally got his laboratory, and we can't wait to find out what he makes in there. So, let's imagine you have a laboratory. What things do you need in there? What would a scientist and inventor need in his or her lab? My list is already getting started in my head, and I can't wait to write it down. Are you ready? Now, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to write down a list of everything a scientist, if you were a scientist, you may or may not need in a science laboratory. I'm going to start my list. You do yours. All right, I think I'm about done with my list. What about you? I can't think of any more, but I might add to my list later on. What did you come up with? I bet you came up with a lot of cool stuff that you might find in a laboratory. I'm going to share my list with you, and as I do, place a check beside anything that you wrote down as well that's on mine. Are you ready? All right, here's some things in my science lab. Jars to measure things, a microscope, scales to weigh things, charts, and always wires and cables. That's just a few things. There could be a lot more. Did you get any of the same things I did? I bet you did. Now, before we really dig into today's lesson, I want to kind of check in on what we learned about in our last lesson. And I'm excited to hear all about your convincing letter, young Marconi. Did your dad agree that you needed a laboratory? Does he agree that the attic would be the perfect place? What did he think when you explained everything you knew about electromagnetic waves? I'm sure he was persuaded, knowing how strongly you believe that you're so close to discovering a way to communicate long distances without wires. Please let me know when you'd like for me to come visit your new attic laboratory. Speaking of labs, in our last lesson, we learned and found out that Marconi's journey to a laboratory was very interesting. Like Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison, Marconi was not the best student in school, but he did have a great interest in science. That led him to devour books about science and began tinkering around with wires and batteries. He even took apart a telegraph and put it back together. We learned that it wasn't long for him to have a great idea, and he wanted to create a worldwide communication system. To get started, his interest landed on something really cool, something that scientists had already discovered: electromagnetic waves. Scientists had discovered that electromagnetic waves could travel short distances. But Marconi wanted to see if he could use this technology to send signals even longer distances, possibly across oceans and across the world. Even more so, could he use electromagnetic waves to send messages long distance and wirelessly? So grab your organizer from our last lesson, the one we started on Marconi. Remember, his first name is pronounced Guglielmo. We ended our reading yesterday when Marconi convinced his father he needed a laboratory to continue his research. His mother helped him out in their attic. Marconi got to work, spending long nights in his new laboratory trying to get electromagnetic waves to travel long distances. Now I'm wondering, will this be the place that Marconi's discovery takes place? If so, what was it like? What did this time in his life lead to? Did it lead to other discoveries? What was the path that led to what we know about his famous invention, a worldwide wireless communication system? Okay, I don't know about you, but I'm ready to head back into today's text and find out more about this Marconi guy. I want you to listen closely as I read. I wonder if we'll find any evidence that Marconi's life was anything like Bell's or Edison's. Let's get going. Guglielmo Marconi, 1874 to 1937. Marconi spent long nights in his laboratory working to get electromagnetic waves to travel longer distances. Marconi eventually figured out how to send an actual signal, Morse code, across the attic without wires. Soon, he was sending messages from his attic to the patio, then half a mile away, then a mile away. He had started a revolution in communication. Okay, what did Marconi actually do? Something that no one had ever done before. Yes, he figured out how to send an actual Morse code without using wires. Wow. You remember it from our last lesson, right? Remember, the Morse code looks something like this. A series of dots and dashes that correspond with letters in the alphabet. How far did he get the signal to go? Can you believe it? First, just across the attic, then to the patio, then half a mile away, and then how far? Yes, a whole mile, without wires. The text says that Marconi started a revolution in communication. What do you think that means? I think it means that he changed the way communication worked. Now, we've got some new information, so we need to add that to our organizer, but I'm going to start a new organizer because this one is kind of full, so I'm going to start a new one with Marconi in the middle, and we're going to add new information as we read today. So I'm going to write Marconi and find a different pen since that one is not working. I'm going to add Marconi here, and I'm going to add that he worked in his attic lab. And I'm also going to add that long distance wireless signals worked. His long distance wireless signals worked. Now, to develop his wireless transmission system, Marconi needed more money. His mother's nephew, who was an engineer living in England, offered to help him. He knew people at the British Post Office who were interested in Marconi's work. The young inventor went to England in 1896 and began demonstrating his wireless system. It could now send signals for miles. People were amazed. Suddenly, everyone was talking about Marconi and all of his accomplishments. So, Marconi is now 22, and he has just discovered that wireless communication was indeed possible. But let's think back to that idea he had a long time ago. Look at your organizer. Do you see it? Yes. Remember, in our last organizer, his idea was to create worldwide communication system. He wasn't done with the discovery itself. He wanted more. The text tells us that he had to develop his wireless system. What do you think the word develop tells us here? Yes, it means that he wanted to make it better. He also knew that he had to get this new technology in front of people to see. Think about this. Why do you think it was important for him to demonstrate his wireless system? I agree. He knew people would be amazed and might see, like he did, the possibility of a world of communication without telegraphic wires. The road to radio. It was now time to turn a passion into a business. Marconi formed a company that set up wireless stations in England. Progress was rapid. Signals were soon being transmitted across greater distances. In 1898, a ship at sea was able to report news to people on land. In 1899, a signal was sent successfully across the English Channel. That same year, the United States got its first wireless demonstration. In 1901, Marconi and his team battled freezing weather in Canada to receive a signal from a station in England. A message had been transmitted all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. Business. That reminds me of another one of our famous inventors, Thomas Edison. Do you remember what his business sold? That's right. It sold those strange-looking machines called stock tickers. Let me reread this part for you. Marconi formed a company that set up a wireless station in England. Progress was rapid. What do you think it means when it says progress was rapid? Yes, it means that growth and improvements to Marconi's wireless system was happening very fast. I'm guessing that everyone was really excited to see this new technology. Speaking of rapid progress, this section is full of information and evidence in the form of achievements, one right after the next. Let's add them to our graphic organizer. I'm going to start my list right here in a place that I know I have plenty of room to add them. First, let's go back a bit and make sure that we did add 1896 when Marconi began demonstrating his wireless system. So I'm going to add 1896 to my graphic organizer, demonstrating wireless system. That's important to add. Now, the amazing feat of 1898 when a ship's signal reached the land. So I'm going to add 1889, ship to land. 1889, ship to land communication. Ship to land communication. Now, I also want to add something else. Let's add 1899 when the United States got their first demonstration of Marconi's wireless communication. 1899 when US gets its first demonstration. It's good to keep dates in our graphic organizer to keep us organized. Then, in 1901, for the unbelievable transmission of a message from England to Canada, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. Let's write 1901 across the Atlantic Ocean in our graphic organizer. 1901 across the Atlantic. Wow, I've got so much stuff on my graphic organizer. Okay, I want you to take a moment to think back to the beginning of our reading. What did we learn that Marconi loved as a boy? Does anybody remember? Yes, he loved the sea. Isn't it neat that he was able to develop a system that would send messages across the sea that he loved so much? We've seen images of all kinds of crazy looking inventions over the last 3 lessons, so there's no reason to stop now, right? Let's take a look at this. Wow. This is a drawing of Marconi's wireless communication device. Another really strange thing, but think of all it could do. Marconi continued to develop his wireless system. He expanded his service across the ocean and his company grew. In 1905, he got married. Around this time, he began having money problems. His wireless system had not caught on completely. Then, one night in 1909, Marconi got a lucky break as a result of a disaster at sea. One ship had hit another ship off the coast of the United States. The wireless system on the heavily damaged ship survived well enough for the operator to signal for help. 1,700 people were saved. Marconi was a hero. Wow, what happened at sea again? That's amazing. If it hadn't been for the ship having Marconi's communication system wirelessly, 1,700 people would have lost their lives. All right, I'm thinking probably what you're thinking, this date definitely belongs on our list. So let's get back to our graphic organizer. I'm going to add that the 1909 disaster at sea in Marconi's wireless system saved 1,700 people. That is what I am going to add. In 1909, his wireless system saves 1,700 people at sea. His wireless system saved 1,700 people at sea. Now, here's some more really cool information. In 1909, Marconi shared the Nobel Peace Prize for physics. Winning the prize was an impressive feat for someone without a university degree. Well, I remember that we learned early on that Marconi didn't get into college, but that he was allowed to access the university's library where he devoured, do you remember that word? Books on science. But it seems as though Marconi did just fine learning on his own, so much that he won a very important award called the Nobel Prize. This is a prize awarded for outstanding achievement in science, the arts, and the cause for peace. Marconi was awarded the Nobel Prize for physics. There's one word we learned earlier, physics. Take a moment to look at your organizer and remember what it means. the type of science that studies matter, energy, and electricity. We learned that in yesterday's lesson. That was a great accomplishment. This is the same year, 1909, that Marconi's wireless system saved 1,700 people in a shipwreck at sea. Let's keep reading. Marconi's next goal was to transmit human voices instead of Morse code over the airwaves. Of course, another goal. I love it. Marconi wanted to transmit human voices over the electromagnetic waves, or what they call it here, the airwaves. What had been transmitted wirelessly up to this point? Correct, just Morse code. That code of dots and dashes that translate into the alphabet. Now he's thinking he wants to transmit a human voice. Wow, do you think he can make that happen? At the time, this, transmitting a human voice without wires, was called wireless telephones without wires. Marconi and his staff weren't the only ones to try to figure out how to do this. There was a lot of competition. Marconi did not turn out to be the first person to broadcast a human voice. However, he later became the first to get 2 ships at sea to exchange voice messages. Looks like he wasn't the one to do it first. As we have been learning, lots of experimenting and inventing was happening at this time, and it looks like someone beat him to the finish line. This reminds me of that race between Mr. Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison to see who could be the first one to invent the speaking telegraph or telephone, with wires, of course. Do you remember who won? Yep, Bell won. So, maybe not the first to broadcast a human voice, but he still did something really cool. What was it? Right, he got 2 ships at sea to exchange voice messages. Again, guys, it's still 1909. A lot happened for Marconi this year, didn't it? Let's add this to our organizer as well. I'm going to add 1909 and 2 ships at sea wirelessly communicate. 1909, 2 ships at sea communicate. That's important to have on our graphic organizer. The start of World War I in 1914 spurred a great deal of development in technology. By the war's end in 1918, almost everything was in place for the first public wireless telephone broadcast, what we call radio today. Remember, Thomas Edison helped to make advancements during the war at this time as well, during the Civil War. It was now the start of World War I, and Marconi can help. His wireless communication system was ready for the very first public broadcast. How cool is that? How do you think Marconi's wireless communication system could help during the time of war? I agree. During war, each side is trying to find the newest, best, and quickest way to outwit the other side. With new technology on your side, like a wireless communication system, it could mean the difference between winning and losing and saving a lot of lives in the meantime. I want to add this to our organizer. So let's write 1918 World War I first public wireless broadcast. So I'm going to add that into my organizer. 1918 World War I first wireless broadcast. We have got so many notes. Radio became very popular after World War I. In 1919, Woodrow Wilson became the first U.S. president to make a public radio broadcast. In 1920, the first radio stations began broadcasting. By 1925, radio was a major source of news and entertainment in U.S. homes. Wow, it took 15 years for Marconi's wireless communication system to develop into something that caught on. Remember, it took a while for Edison's light bulb to do the same. Let's take a look at a picture of Marconi surrounded by one of his wireless communication systems. That looks like a lot to keep up with. All those dials and levers. How cool is that picture? Here's another few important dates I would like to add on to our organizer. So grab your organizer. I think it's important to add that 1919 was the president's first public broadcast. Let's add that. 1919, the president's first public broadcast. That's important to know. Now, let's add 1920 as the first year that radio stations began to broadcast. So 1920, I'm going to go over here. I'm running out of room. 1920, first radio stations. We have so much information. I love a graphic organizer so much. Then let's finish up our list with 1925. 1925 was a big year, guys. It was a year that marked the fact that Marconi's wireless system had in fact caught on, and it's now what we consider radio. That is a major source of entertainment and news, even in people's homes. So 1925, that's a big one. That is when radio was considered entertainment. And news. A lot of people get their news from the radio, and a lot of people listen to music on the radio. I'm sure you do every day. Today, families sit around together and watch TV. What do you think it was like back then to sit around and listen to the radio? Do you want to see? I'll show you. Although this might seem strange to us because we don't really do it that much anymore, it was the wave of the future for people living in 1925. This is what they did for entertainment. Marconi was not really involved in the radio industry. His contribution had been discovering how to send sound without wires and then creating a worldwide wireless network. Yet the work he did with wireless technology made the radio industry possible. We learned here that Marconi didn't really want to be involved in the radio industry, the making and selling of radios. Why do you think this was the case? Yes, I think that too. I believe Marconi was satisfied being on the science end of discovery and was happy to leave the radio industry up to other people. He just wanted to worry about the science part. In 1919, Marconi bought a yacht and made it his floating laboratory. He continued to experiment with his lifelong interest, electromagnetic waves. In his later years, he suffered from bad health and he wasn't able to do much work at the time. On July 20th, 1937, this amazing inventor died at the age of 63. His death was reported around the world over the wireless network. That network was then briefly shut down, as telephones were for Bell and lights were for Edison, to mark the end of a life that significantly changed communication and our world forever. So, like Bell and Edison, Marconi also continued to experiment. Where did we just read that Marconi made a new laboratory? Wow, that's pretty cool, a floating one on the water. But we know he loved the sea, so I guess it does make sense. But I hope he was careful. We also just read that, like Bell and Edison, something special happened when Marconi died. What was it? Do you remember? Yes, his death was reported around the world, all across his wireless network. Then the network briefly shut down as a tribute to this great inventor. So, let's pull our brains together and get you ready for your independent practice at home. I want to look over all of our notes about Guglielmo Marconi. Wow, we have so much. We've got this graphic organizer. We've got this graphic organizer. I see that Marconi was born 30 years after Mr. Bell and Thomas Edison. I also see that he loved the sea, but he did not love school, but loving the sea would be important later on in life. I noticed that he really had a good interest in science and electricity. We read in our lesson a few days ago that Marconi did not get into college, but because of a science professor, he had access to all the library books there. We also see that the telegraph, was it on this one or the other one? The telegraph was a really big invention for Marconi, but his idea was to send wireless messages. We see that here. He wanted to explore the use of magnetic waves as a way to send wireless messages. And he did just that, first in his attic laboratory and then eventually miles away. From then on, Marconi's life was full of amazing accomplishments, and we documented all that here on our graphic organizer. You can tell because of the dates that we have. From 1896 to 1920, Marconi used his wireless system to send messages from ships to land, from ships to other ships, and all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. We have that right here in 1901. His wireless system even saved the lives of 1,700 people at sea aboard a ship that was going down. Right here, wireless system saved 1,700 people at sea. We wrote it on our graphic organizer. In that time period, we also learned that he won the Nobel Peace Prize for Physics and assisted in making the first public wireless broadcast during World War I. In 1919, we found out that the President of the United States made his first public broadcast. We even wrote that down on our graphic organizer over what was now called the radio. And then by 1925, the radio was a regular way for people to get their news and entertainment. It had finally caught on. No more of those wires strung everywhere. We just did a really good review of our graphic organizer. But most importantly, we discovered that Marconi was a man that was mesmerized by science. He wasn't interested in the radio industry, but he was satisfied to have helped with the discovery of a worldwide communication system that paved the way eventually for what we know as radio now. We also discovered that, like Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison, Marconi led a very interesting life, full of challenges, full of hard work, and many great accomplishments along the way. He continued to think about ways that he could build upon the ideas of others. We've been talking about that for all week, but set himself a life goal and pushed until he hit a target, a worldwide wireless communication system. Let's take some time to think about the path that led Marconi to his famous invention. Grab a piece of paper. I'm going to ask you a few questions, like I always do, about Marconi. What were some of the opportunities that Marconi had along the way to show others what he could do? Next question. How does his invention of a worldwide wireless communication system prove that he valued the process of building upon the ideas of other inventors? How do we know that it was simply the science behind the discovery that he was very proud of? I'll give you a few minutes to go back and look over your answers before we move on. Now it's time for our independent work. I'd like for you to make sure that you have everything you need for your independent practice. We just completed a really solid review of both of our organizers. Another great job capturing so much information. We also took some time to think deeply about how his life led to a worldwide wireless communication system, or now what we think of as radio. So I think you're ready. Now, after our lesson is over today, I want you to take some time to complete another really cool activity. Take a second to look at this picture really quickly. Look at this. 3 gentlemen sitting around listening to the radio. I'm going to set up a scenario for you. Now, you can read along if you'd like. I'm going to put up another image up here, and this is your independent practice. Keep this image in mind. Here is your independent practice. Imagine you are living in 1925, and people have been getting this really cool new gadget for their homes, a radio. Your family lives on the outskirts of town, and it's taken quite a while for those telegraphic cables to come down as wireless communication takes over. You've been following this invention from the start and have clipped out every newspaper article about the great inventor, Marconi. He's the one that developed the science behind the wireless communication and has made it possible to listen to the radio in homes and businesses all over the world. You come home from school one day to see that your family has a radio. You're so excited to ask your parents if you can invite some friends over to listen to it with you. Your parents tell you that your friends are welcome to come over a little later this week. You decide that you're going to impress them with everything you know about this invention, including all that led up to it. You head into your room, you pull out a notebook, and you start making a timeline of everything you can remember about Marconi, his work towards a wireless communication system, and how the world has used what we now call radio. Use a clean piece of paper to create your timeline. Be sure to reference your organizer for facts and details. So again, here's what you're doing. You are to write down everything you know to impress your friends and create a timeline about Marconi. I know you're going to do a fantastic job. Who knows? Maybe I'll come along with your friends and listen too. As always, I've enjoyed learning with you today, and I'm glad we got to know more about Guglielmo Marconi, especially now that we can add him to the great inventors of the electrical age, right there beside Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison. All 3 of these inventors have changed the way we live. Thank you as always for inviting me into your home. I look forward to seeing you in next week's lesson at Tennessee's At Home Learning Series.